Okay, so this lecture is the uh, other side of the coin with respect to pharmacokinetics, the topic that was lectured before this. No? So this is about pharmacodynamics. So when kinetics was discussed, it involves the central concept of how a drug is processed by the body. So here you were introduced to the concept of absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Here in dynamics, we look at how the drug uh, affects cells, tissues, and organs. So it's the opposite naman. Although these two processes occur uh, corollary to one another. No? So here, central to the topic of dynamics is the concept of receptors. No? So I will begin with uh, certain basic concepts uh, which you may be familiar with in your first year subjects. No? So let me share my slide presentation. The slide presentation has also already been uploaded in your learning management system. Okay. So central to how a drug will affect or takes effect on the body will be the concept of receptors. No? So for most drugs that we use, um, these drugs have to interact with receptors in the cells or the tissues of the patient. No? And this interaction will lead to the formation of drug receptor complexes. No? And this will translate into pharmacologic effects of the drug. Now, what are receptors? If you recall, receptors are it's part of the cell or tissue of the organism, and it's the part that interacts with a drug or ligand to bring about the observed effects of the drug. No? So when we say ligand, it's a substance, like for example, a neurotransmitter or a hormone that is produced endogenously within the body, whereas drugs are administered from exogenous sources. No? But both, to take effect, usually they have to interact with their specific receptors in the cells or tissues of the body. However, there are some drugs that we use that will take effect um, without having to interact with any receptor. No? Like for example, if you take an antacid, the antacid, upon reaching the stomach compartment, will simply neutralize the acid that has been secreted there. So it doesn't have to act with a specific receptor, no, in the mucosa of the stomach. So this is one of the few examples, no. But generally, for most drugs that we use in the clinics, there has to be a drug receptor interaction to form drug receptor complexes that will translate into clinical or observable effects of the drug. Okay, so like what is illustrated in the slide before you. So when a drug binds to its receptor, then its affinity or degree of binding will have a certain strength, no? Most of the drugs, when they bind to the receptors, the the binding is not very strong, no? So after a while, they will detach, and the receptor again is liberated or freed, no? And for most of the drugs that we use, they bind, when they bind, the bond type that they form are a combination of van der Waals, hydrogen or ionic bonds that are rather weak, no, or not as strong as covalent bonding. There are some drugs that are capable of binding irreversibly to their receptors in the cells, no? And that is because, and it is said that when such a strong bond is formed, this bond is called the covalent bond, no? And so some drugs act that way, and therefore you form permanent drug receptor complexes. Now, what you see here is a phenomenon which we call the induced fit. No, it refers to the conformational changes that occur in the receptor binding site when the drug binds to it. No, uh, in most cases, when a drug binds to its receptor, then there are conformational changes that occur in the binding site of the receptor. No, so these changes causes the binding site to wrap around more closely to the uh, part of the drug molecule that binds to it. No, so we call that induced fit, and this will is said to enhance the quality of the drug receptor binding and will make the receptor action more efficient. So what is the macromolecular nature of drug receptors? Now, they're usually proteins, so they can be regulatory proteins like in the form of hormones or neurotransmitters. They could be receptors could be enzymes, no? Therefore, when a drug or ligand binds to it, depending on the drug molecule, then that enzyme may be inhibited or activated. They can also be transport proteins like your serotonin transporters or norepinephrine transporters, or they can be structural proteins like, for example, the tubulin structure in the cells, no? And these transport proteins and structural proteins have become drug targets. So we have developed medication that affect the activity of these target proteins. For example, um, in gout, no, you have inflammation of your joints. Okay, so colchicine is one medication that we use to control the inflammation, and they act by inhibiting the tubulin apparatus of inflammatory cells, preventing their migration to the site of inflammation, which is the joints. And this will translate to an improvement of the symptoms and the reduction of inflammation of the concerned joint. Now, there are what we call also orphan receptors. What are orphan receptors? These are receptors whose natural ligands we have not yet discovered. No? So we're just on the verge of finding out what are the natural ligands in the body that bind to them. And by examining this, we can predict what are the functions of these receptors. No? So the importance of orphan receptors will be in drug development. So when we have mapped out their function, and we eventually find out if they are involved in certain disease states, then they can be potential drug targets for the development of agents to cure or reduce the disease process. So they are said to be potential targets for future drug development. Now, what would be the consequences of knowing or understanding the receptor concept, no? What would be the practical consequences and its clinical on drug development and clinical effects? So, number one, receptors mainly determine the quantitative relations between the drug dose and its pharmacologic effects, no? And we say that the affinity or the strength by which the drug binds to its receptor will determine the amount of drug that is needed to produce a significant amount or concentration of drug receptor complex, no? So, meaning if the drug forms a very strong bond, no? For example, it forms a covalent bond with its receptor, and therefore you form drug receptor complex that are more or less permanent, then you don't usually need more drugs, no? Uh, Compared to a system in which you form only weaker bonds, no? You might need to put in more drug concentrations in the system because the drug receptor complex that are formed will in time detach, and therefore you see a reduction in the pharmacologic effect. So you need to give or to administer more drug molecules in the system, no? And also consequent to this first statement is the fact that um, usually the total number of receptors may limit a drug's maximal effect. No? Later on, we will find out situations in which this does not apply. No? But in most situations, when the total number of receptors have all been occupied by the drug molecules, then further increase in drug administration will no longer produce additional pharmacologic action. And this is because you have already exhausted uh, you have already occupied all the drug receptors, and you have formed the maximal number of drug receptor complex possible in the system. But there are occasions that I will explain later on where this may not apply. No? The second consequence of this on clinical effects and potential drug development is the fact that receptors are also main determinants of a drug's selective action. No? So, meaning a drug's features or characteristics in terms of maybe its molecular size, its shape, and electrical charge will determine its affinity to its particular receptor. No? So if you change something about the structure of the drug, no, then it will also affect the affinity of the drug to its receptor. And this forms one of the bases for producing drugs that have more, that will usually have a uh, better safety profile. No? For example, if we talk about beta blockers, no, you have a hypertensive patient, and one of the strategy of lowering blood pressure is, of course, to reduce heart rate. No, so you give a beta blocker that will block or inhibit or antagonize the beta receptors in the heart. No, and therefore you produce a lowering of the BP because that drug, upon binding to the beta receptors in the heart, will cause the heart rate to decrease. Now, if you give a beta blocker that is non-selective, it means to say that it can bind to all the other subtypes of beta receptors. So, for example, if it binds and blocks the beta 1, no, it may also uh, it may also cause effect in the bronchial airways, no? Because it does not recognize or distinguish between beta 1 subtype and beta 2 subtype, which is in the bronchiole. So consequently, if you give this non-selective blocker like propranolol, and your hypertensive patient happens to be asthmatic or happens to have a hyperreactive airways, then there's a danger of causing the bronchioles to constrict. So they have developed changes in the structure of beta blockers so that we now have selective beta 1 blockers. So these are exclusively used to block or act as um, cardiac inhibitors, meaning they lower heart rate, and by lowering heart rate and strength of contraction, they consequently help decrease in the blood pressure of the patient. No? But because they are more selective to beta 1, no, because of their structure, and they do not readily bind to beta 2 in therapeutic doses, then this is safer for patients with asthma or hyperreactive airways. No? The third consequence is that your receptors will also mediate the action of agonist and antagonist. No? So, uh, if you remember, agonists are drugs or ligands. Ligands, which as I mentioned, are naturally produced in the body. No? These are drugs or ligands that upon binding to the receptor will cause it to release a signal or produce a signal. No? So you have a biologic response, no? As you see in the diagram on the screen. An antagonist or antagonists are drugs or ligands that upon binding do not cause the receptor to release a signal. So consequently, you do not produce a biologic response. Okay. Now let us examine now the relationship between uh, drug concentration and response. No? Now, the way the dose of a drug affects the body is of course complicated, no? Because there are many factors in the individual that affect his or her response to the drug. But in simple settings, like in the laboratory setting, no, the link between the drug's dose and its effect is usually simple or straightforward, no, and this can be expressed mathematically, no. Uh, Although when a drug response become complex in the real setting, we have to understand this basic concept of drug concentration and concomitant cellular response. No, we have to understand the basic for us to be able to understand more the complexity of drug response in the clinical setting. So under this topic, we will discuss the concentration effect curves and the receptor binding agonists. No, we have the receptor effector coupling and spare receptors, competitive and irreversible antagonists, and your agonists. No, so the first is this concept, no, the drug response relationship. So pharmacodynamics of a drug is quantified or measured by the relationship between its dose or concentration and the patient's response to that drug. So central to this concept will be how the dose response relationship is how it is related to the drug receptor binding relationship. So this is what I mean. No? The In simple terms, no, the response to a drug is proportional to the concentration of the receptors that are bound or occupied by the drug. No? Because the response to a drug is reflected by the amount of drug receptor complex that is formed with this interaction. No? Uh, So we look at the concentration effect curves and the receptor binding of agonists, no, like indicated in the slide. So when a drug is given at low dose, no, it's given at low dose, there's often an increase in the response of the tissues or increase in the pharmacologic effects, which is uh, directly proportional to the increase in dose. No? However, as you increase the dose, especially if you go over the therapeutic range, the extent of the increase in response diminishes until a dose is reached when you no longer see any further increment of the effects or the response. No? Um, and this is mathematically expressed by the equation shown on the right side of your screen. So the effect of a drug is equal to its maximum effect times its concentration or dose over its concentration or dose times its EC50. So what is EC50? EC50 is the effective concentration 50%, which means it's the amount of drug that will produce 50% of its maximal effect. Now, so again, the EC50 is the amount or dose or concentration of the drug that produces 50% of its maximum effect. So the EC50 is actually a reflection of the potency of a drug. So the lower the EC50, the more potent the drug is. Okay? Which means to say that you need to give only a smaller amount or dose of the drug, and you already get 50% of the maximum response. And that means that this drug is relatively more potent than another drug in which you need to give more concentration or you need to give higher doses in order to get 50% of maximum response. So potency again is defined as the concentration at which the drug elicits 50% of its maximal response. And this is partly dependent on how efficient is the drug receptor coupling that we're talking about a while ago. No? Whereas efficacy or Emax is the maximal response produced by the drug. Normally, the Emax represents the state at which all receptors are occupied by the drug so that additional doses will not produce an added response. Why? Because you have already occupied all the available receptors and you have already created the maximum amount of drug receptor complexes. As I mentioned, there are situations where this may be variable, no? The potency may be variable. And we'll go into that in a while. So if you look at this curve, no, on curve A, that's a reflection of your EC50, right? So you will see that the EC50 is actually the amount of drug concentration at which you get 50% of the maximal effect of the drug, no? Now, when this is translated into receptor, drug receptor relationship, then we use the term KD, no? So we use the term EC50 when we are relating the drug effect to its dose or concentration. When we are relating the amount of occupied receptors or receptor occupancy to the concentration or dose of the drug, we talk about the concept of KD. No? So KD is an equilibrium dissociation constant. No? So it represents the concentration of the drug or dose of the drug at which you occupy 50% of the receptors in the system. So there's a similarity here. And there are situations when they coincide, but there are also situations when they do not. And we will go through that one by one. So again, when you talk about EC50, this has to do with the relationship of the drug effect or the response to the drug to the dose of the drug. When we talk about KD, then we are actually relating the receptor occupancy or the number of receptors occupied to the dose or concentration of the drug. So I hope that makes it clear, no? So when the KD of a drug is low, it means that it binds very strongly. So the lower the KD, it means the more that a drug binds to its receptor. Drugs with high KD are said to have low binding affinity, so they rapidly dissociate, no, to free up the receptor once again. Okay, so again, the KD is a measure of the binding affinity, how tightly a drug binds to its receptor. It reflects the concentration of the drug at which 50% of receptors are occupied. So, means to say, when you have a low KD, no, it means that it does not dissociate readily. No, so it's a rather potent drug, and therefore you need a lesser dose to occupy, to keep 50% of your receptors occupied, no? Compared to a drug with a high KD. Because a drug with a high KD, meaning the dissociation constant is great, and therefore the binding affinity is lower, it rapidly detaches. So it's hard for the system to maintain a stable amount of drug receptor complexes because the drug will rapidly dissociate. So for you to maintain 50% of the receptors occupied, you need to give a higher dose or concentration of the drug. You need to infuse a higher concentration of the drug into that system. EC50 is a measure of the functional effect. So again, it's the concentration needed to produce 50% of the maximum biologic response. So EC50 will not only be reflective of the binding, but it also is reflective of what happens after binding, the efficiency of the events or signaling processes that occur after the drug binds to its receptor. So when we talk about drug receptor curve, that's where the KD comes in. When it's dose response curve, because these are measure of functional effect, that's where we use EC50. Okay? So let me throw you this question. Now, you see this particular graph. You have drug A and drug B. And each drug will have its own EC50. And so which drug do you think is more potent? If you answered A, then you are correct because um, at lower concentrations, drug A will already produce 50% of the maximum response. No? Whereas you need to use a little bit more, you need to give a higher dose of drug B to elicit 50% of the maximum response. But when you're asked which drug is more effective or which drug is efficacious, your answer will be both, no? Because if you look at the graph, both drugs will eventually give you the maximum response, no? It's just that drug A is more potent. But both drugs are said to be efficacious because when we talk of efficacy of the drug, it does not consider the volume or the dose of the drug. It just answers the question, will the drug give you the maximum effect? And as the graph shows in front of you, both drugs will eventually produce maximum effect. Okay. Now let's go to the concept of spare receptors, no? So what are spare receptors? A spare receptor is a receptor that um, will not be needed to be occupied for a drug to produce a maximum biologic response, no? So meaning it's an extra receptor. So extra receptors or spare receptors exist beyond the number of receptors required for the drug to produce a biologic response, no? So this is one situation wherein the EC50 does not necessarily the dose that will give you 50% of maximum response will not necessarily coincide with the dose that will uh, cause 50% of the receptors to be occupied. Okay? So, a drug may only need, there are certain drugs no, that may need to activate only a fraction of the total receptors in order to trigger a full response. So we say that the receptors that remain unoccupied are extra or spare and therefore not needed for a full effect that can be elicited by that particular drug. So there are drugs that act that way. No? There are systems like the beta adrenergic system that will have spare receptors. No? Okay. So again, to clarify, or to reiterate the concept, when is EC50 and KD identical? So the dose that is able to produce 50% of maximum response will be the same as the dose needed to require 50% receptor occupancy in the following situation. No? When the drug's binding to the receptor directly causes the effect, meaning there are no spare receptors. And therefore, we describe the system as linear. No? So, when the system is linear, it does not possess any spare receptors in the system. There are no spare receptors that are there. Then receptor occupancy will directly lead to a proportionate increase in the response. So when you increase the dose, you see a similar increment in the degree of pharmacologic response. No? So this is when EC50 is similar to KD. No amplification, or there are no spare receptors that will exist. So later on, we will talk more about what signal amplification is. No? And this is characteristic of certain systems like the beta-adrenergic system. So when is EC50 not the same as KD? In instances when there are spare receptors, no, a full response can occur even when not all the receptors are occupied. So meaning there are certain instances where a drug can bind only to a fraction of the receptors in the system, and they already produce 50% of the maximum response, let alone the maximum response. So, ibig sabihin, hindi nila kailangan mag-occupy ng lahat ng receptors na yun para makita mo yung maximum response ng gamot, no? So, in this instance, where there are spare receptors in the system, the EC50 is usually less than KD. So the dose that is needed to produce 50% of the maximum response will be less than the dose that is required to produce 50% receptor occupancy. So in systems where you have high signal amplification and high efficacy agonist, your drug is a full agonist, no? This can produce the maximum effects at low receptor occupancy. Therefore, it follows that this drug can produce 50% of the maximum response at lower receptor occupancy than KD. If you have a partial agonist is one that by nature, it can produce the same effects as its full agonist counterpart, but the overall effect is much less. No? So if the drug is only a partial agonist and not a full agonist, it may occupy all the receptors, but it still cannot produce the maximum response that can be produced by a full agonist. And therefore here, the EC50 may be much more. So for you to produce 50%, let alone a maximum effect, you will have to use more doses of the drug than is required to occupy 50% of the available receptors. So in this particular instance, the EC50 may be more than the KD. So let me cite an example of all of these. No? Isoproterenol is a beta-adrenergic full agonist. So it's an agonist that is characterized by high efficacy at the beta 1 receptors in the heart. No? So if you look at the slide, this will be the effects seen in the heart. No? It's a cardiac stimulant. No? So you have increased heart rate, increased contraction, etc. So it targets the beta 1 adrenergic receptors on the heart, but it needs to occupy only a small percentage, no? And as the book will tell you, isoproterenol need only occupy 10 to 20% of the beta 1 adrenergic receptors in the heart for the full or maximum response to be elicited. So in this particular case, this is a full agonist effect, no? And as we say here, the EC50 is much less than the KD. So this must be a system with signal amplification, and it is a drug that is said to be of high efficacy, which is usually characteristic of full agonists. No? Okay. So this is another diagram that will help you remember or understand the concept of spare or reserve receptor. So you can see when you have a full agonist there, a full efficacy agonist like isoproterenol on beta 1 receptors in the heart, no? You will see that you can produce maximum effects even when you occupy only 10 to 20%, no, of the total amount of receptors. So the rest are said to be reserved, no, or spare receptors. Okay? So here you're able to produce already at this point 50% of the maximum effects. No? So the ED50 is much less, can be much less than the KD as the drawing indicates. No? You do not need to occupy 50% of the receptors to produce 50% of the maximum response. Why? Because this is a drug which is a full agonist, no? And it's a system that might be capable of what we call signal amplification. And we will look at that in the next section of the lecture. So the remaining receptors that are unoccupied will be what we call reserve or spare or extra receptors. Okay? So let us look at this graph and try to understand what it means. No? So in this particular drawing or diagram, if you look at curve A, this is the normal response when it's only the agonist that is present. Okay. So this is the agonist concentration. So this will be the respective EC50s. No? And this is the response. No? So this is 50% of the maximum response. Okay. So again, curve A shows the normal response when there's only an agonist. No? What happens if you add a competitive antagonist in the system? So look at letter B. So you will see that the maximum response of the agonist will still be achieved. Okay? But you have to give, meaning you can also achieve full maximum response here, but you will note that you have to give more of the agonist. Okay? Because you have a competitive antagonist there that will fight for the binding site, no? And acts contrary to your agonist. So, in order for you to overcome that opposite effect of the competitive antagonist, you have to give in or administer more competitors, which will be higher doses of your agonist, no? So in letter C, it's the same, no? You still add a little bit more, no? A little bit more of your uh, antagonist, and therefore you need a higher dose, no? You still need a higher dose of your agonist, and this time, no? It may be binding already to the spare receptors available. So they're already competing for the spare receptors that are in the system. Okay? So you still manage to achieve um, the maximum effect even with additional increase in the uh, antagonist. But this time, uh, uh, you're already using up your spare receptors. Okay? Now, what happens in curve D and E? When you add even more antagonists in the system, you're already running out of the spare receptors. Wala ka ng spare receptors dito. So what happens, you do not achieve anymore the maximum effect of the agonist. So even if at higher doses of the antagonist, which will occupy more receptors, including the remaining spare receptors, wala na. Wala ka ng masyadong receptors available. No? So even if you add more of your agonist, since you already out of receptors, you will no longer achieve the maximum effect. So the maximum effect is set to decline. Why? Because there's no more available spare receptors in the system. So even adding additional amounts of the drug, you will not achieve the maximum effect. Okay? So at this point, the EC50 of the agonist will become closer to its KD. No? So it approaches its KD because you already ran out of spare receptors in the system. Okay, let's talk about receptor effector coupling. So again, the idea is you have an agonist plus a receptor, it binds to its receptor. There are conformational changes that occur in the receptor, and this eventually translate into the pharmacologic response. So coupling is the process, the transduction process that will connect the drug's binding to its receptor and the pharmacologic response. So it means to say that this is what occurs upon binding, upon drug binding to its receptor. Now, how strongly a drug binding leads to a response depends partly on the receptor. So the relative efficiency of the transduction process, which we call coupling, is dependent on two things. Now, one, the receptor, and second, what happens after the receptor is activated. So we call it the downstream biochemical events. No? So these are the intracellular steps that occur after receptor activation. So when we talk about full agonists, no, they usually cause a bigger change in the receptor shape, no. So the conformational changes become more emphasized than when you give a partial agonist, no. And this greater change in the conformation, you have a greater induced fit, makes them more effective, no. So after this, the strength of the response will also depend on what happens inside the cell after activation, no? So here, it depends. For some receptors, like ion channel receptors, no? The response is said to be straightforward or simple. The more response ensues when you have more uh, when you have more receptors occupied by the drug. No? So the greater the number of receptors bound by the drug, the greater is the pharmacologic response. No? But there are other types of receptors, especially those that will utilize complex signaling inside the cell. For example, your enzyme leak receptors, um, the response can reach maximum even when not all the receptors are occupied. So this is what we're mentioning. No? What happens inside may be um, one of signal amplification. So you don't need to use a whole lot of drug, no, to produce or elicit a full response. No? So there are kinds of receptors that behave that way. And so we will look into these different types of um, signaling mechanisms in the subsequent portion of the lecture. So the sensitivity of a cell or tissue to a particular agonist dose that is introduced in the system will be dependent on, number one, as we mentioned, receptor affinity, and number two, the degree of spareness, which means the amount of receptors present compared to the actual number needed to elicit the maximum biologic response. So this is the total number of receptors present compared to the actual number of receptors that you need to be occupied to elicit maximum biologic response. No? So number two suggests that the presence of spare receptors will determine, therefore, is a determinant of the sensitivity of a cell or tissue to a particular agonist drug. No? So remember that the more spare receptors the system has, no, in the tissue, the more sensitive that tissue is to the drug or to the agonist. No? So, therefore, changes in the number of receptors, therefore, can change how much a drug is needed for a given response. No? So, ang tanong, pwede bang maiba ang bilang ng receptors sa tissues or sa isang system? And the answer is yes. No? Can the number of receptors be changed? And the answer is yes, and this is the phenomenon which we call up or down regulation of receptors. No? So when we say down regulation, the number of receptors decreases in the target cells. When we say up regulation, then there is an increase in the number of receptors uh, uh, for a hormone in a target cell or tissue. No? So it is said that the number of receptors can be up or down regulated because of as a response to natural biologic processes or as a response to an administered drug. No? So this is by way of regulation of receptor expression. So it has to do with the modifying the gene activity that expresses receptors, no? The production of receptors. And it happens in two main ways, na either up or down regulation. So when you have a change in the number of receptors, then of course there's a change in tissue sensitivity to a drug. Okay, so in upregulation, in which you have an increase in the receptor number, um, so you have an increase in receptor production because there is a stimulation of gene receptor expression. Or it can also happen, you can also have upregulation when more receptors are migrated to the surface of the cell from the cytoplasm. No? So for example, this happens when a patient is using a receptor blocker for a long time, like a beta blocker. No? A beta blocker, a long-term use of beta blockers can cause the body to produce more receptors. No? In states of pregnancy or stress, then there may be an increase in the number of hormonal receptors in certain tissues. In downregulation, which you have a reduction in receptor production or receptors sink from the location in the cell membrane, they're pulled away from the surface of the cell membrane. This can occur in chronic use of agonist, no? And this is what can occur in drug addiction or in hormonal therapy also. And this can cause the body to remove or sequester receptors away from the cell surface to avoid overstimulation by the constant presence or utilization of a particular drug. No? Disease states like inflammation may decrease receptor expression in affected tissue. So the gene expression regulating receptor expression and production may be inhibited in certain disease conditions like inflammatory diseases. Okay. So let's go to, okay, why does it matter? Why does it matter? It matters because when we change the number of receptors, this affects tissue sensitivity. So the more receptors there are in the system, the tissue becomes more sensitive. So you need less or lower drug doses to elicit a pharmacologic effect. Fewer receptors, the tissues become less sensitive, and you would probably need higher doses of the drug to elicit the pharmacologic effect that is warranted. This is why it's important, receptor regulation is important in pharmacology because it helps us understand later on the concept of drug tolerance, the concept of withdrawal, and drug responsiveness in clinical settings. Okay? So let's look at the different types of drugs in detail. So we have presented to you earlier what are drug antagonists, no, or antagonists, and what are agonists. No? So let's look at antagonists first. No? So when you say receptor antagonist, this binds either to the active site of the cell. The active site meaning it's also the same binding site as the agonist or the ligand, no? Or it can bind to an allosteric site or a different site on the receptor. Okay? So active site binding receptor antagonist, or it can be an allosteric site binding receptor antagonist. When you say it's allosteric binding, it means it does not bind to the active site to which the ligand or the agonist binds to, but it binds to a different site uh, also located in the receptor. Okay? So, uh, active site antagonists will prevent the agonist from binding to the receptor. No? In this particular case, the antagonist competes with the ligand or the agonist for the active site. So it's termed as competitive antagonist. Okay? So competitive antagonist binds to the active site similar to the ligand or the agonist, and the binding is said to be reversible. In this particular case, no, if you want to overcome the effect of the competitive antagonist in the system, then you simply have to increase the dose of the agonist. No? Now, receptor antagonists binding to the active site may also be irreversible. And when it is irreversible, then it is said to be non-competitive already, which means to say that um, these are usually drugs that permanently bind, they do not detach at all to the active binding site, and therefore they deprive the agonist from occupying the receptor. So even if you increase the dose of the agonist, no, you may not achieve its maximum effect because the receptors are already permanently occupied or sequestered from it by the antagonist in the system. So forever na yon not available for the agonist. So even if you increase the agonist, then the active site of the receptors are already occupied by the by the antagonist. That's why we say that the antagonist here is it's non-competitive, no? Meaning you are unable to surmount its effect or overcome its effect. Then allosteric site binding receptor antagonists may also be reversible, which is usually the case, or in some minority drugs, it could be irreversible. So this is said to also be non-competitive, no? Because when they bind to that allosteric site, they automatically inactivate or shut down the active site, making it unavailable for the agonist. So while they are there, whether they bind reversibly or irreversibly, while they are there in the allosteric site, they automatically shut down or close all the active sites for which the agonist um, intends to bind. So even if you increase the dose of the agonist, it can no longer bind to the receptor and you can no longer recover its maximum effect, no? So in all these types, no, the only situation where the effect of the antagonist can be overcome or surmounted is when the antagonist is a competitive antagonist, no? The other type of antagonist, receptor antagonist, they are non-competitive, meaning you do not recover the maximum effect of the agonist, no, by adding or increasing its dose, no, because the receptor binding sites for that agonist will be closed or unavailable for as long as the uh, antagonist is there, either in the active site or in an allosteric site. Now, there are also other types of antagonists which do not act on receptors, no? And we will discuss examples of chemical antagonists and physiologic antagonists. These are what you call non-receptor antagonists, and this will be I will present the examples of this later on. Okay, so let's look first at competitive and irreversible antagonists. As I mentioned, um, when you talk about receptor antagonists, they bind to the receptor, but they do not activate it. So you do not produce a signal and you do not produce a biologic response. No? So its primary action is to reduce the effect of the agonist or the endogenous ligand that would, in normal circumstances, activate the receptor. So you don't see a biologic or functional effect, no, in the absence of an agonist. So, meaning a competitive a receptor antagonist usually do not function if there are no ligand or no agonist in the area. Okay? Pag walang agonist dun sa system, walang epekto ang competitive, ang receptor antagonist nyo. There's only one exception. And these are a group of agents which we call inverse agonists. No? What are inverse agonists? So medyo may confusion sa name na yon, no? It's called an inverse agonist, but it's actually an antagonist, no? And this is the only type of antagonist that can function even if there are no agonist or ligand in the system. Okay? Uh, And this is because when they bind to the receptor, they reduce the constitutive activity of that receptor. So magsha-shut down yung receptor, making it unavailable. Okay? So receptors are said to be constitutively active. No? So active yan in the system. But this shuts down or the receptor activity is lower than baseline normal activity, uh, making it even more uh, effective in terms of not eliciting a biologic response. No? Kasi ito nag-work even in the absence of an agonist or ligand in the system. So if you look at this, no? If you look at the graph, this will probably help explain it clearer, no? If you have an antagonist, you will not see a baseline response. Again, because the antagonist is a drug that inhibits the receptor from releasing a signal. But if you give an inverse agonist, it goes even below that, no? Because it practically shuts down the activity or the innate activity of the receptor. So you don't have, it's much more difficult to recover the activity of the receptor because it's shut down, no? By the inverse agonist. So we say that this causes an inhibition of the constitutive activity of the receptor. And therefore, this inhibition can occur, or this antagonism can occur even in the absence of an agonist or a ligand in the system. Whereas the other antagonists can only work if there is also an agonist or a ligand in the system. Okay? So, pag wala, you might observe, no, because it lowers the receptor activity below its baseline. What is the clinical implication? So, the clinical implication may be that it can produce a response that is opposite to that which is expected when that particular receptor is activated. Now, for example, we have the drug which we call beta carbolines. No? These are inverse agonists at the GABA A receptor. So, if you normally stimulate GABA A receptors, these are activated, this will produce a calming effect, no, or a sedative effect. Kasi GABA is one of the, it's our main uh, neurotransmitter that is inhibitory in nature, no? So bababa yung ano, no, you experience a calming effect or even a hypnotic effect, no? Now, when you give an inverse agonist, you might actually produce an opposite clinical effect because you shut down the constitutive activity of the GABA A receptor. And so, uh, the patient will manifest with anxiety, okay, and uh, sleep difficulties, okay. So that is why we consider inverse agonist as actually antagonist, no? Okay, so let's focus on competitive antagonists. What do we know so far? They are reversible, and their effects, they bind to the active site, so to the similar site as the same site as the agonist or the natural ligand. And uh their effect is surmountable, no? So increasing, what happens if you increase the concentration of the antagonist in the system in the presence of a fixed amount of agonist? So naturally, you will expect that if you increase the amount or the dose of antagonist, you will reduce the response to the agonist. No? So, magle-lessen yung effect ng agonist. So, in fact, if you give very high levels of the antagonist, very high doses or concentration of the antagonist, you can actually prevent almost completely the response to the agonist that is present there. No? However, the effect, as I mentioned, the effect of the competitive antagonist can be overcome or surmounted by increasing uh, the concentration of the agonist. Okay, so increasing the dose of the agonist um, may cause you to actually overcome or defeat the effect of the antagonist, and therefore you might be able to recover the maximum effect of the agonist, no, but at the expense of giving it at a higher dose. Okay, so the maximum effect of the agonist is the same for any fixed amount of the antagonists, no. um Meaning to say, uh, if the amount of antagonists remains the same, then increasing the amount of whatever amount of agonist you give, no, in increasing increments will cause you to recover or to achieve the Emax. So the Emax will remain the same, no? It's just that you have to increase the dose. Now, Emax is the same, but you have to increase the dose of the agonist you give to be able to surmount or overcome the effect of the antagonist at fixed doses of the latter. So this is what happens, no, in the presence of a competitive antagonist. So this will help you understand my statement, no. So the flat line here, you don't get a response because you have the antagonist there. Okay. Now what happens if you have only the agonist? So you see this curve, no. What happens if both are present? If both are present, then you will see that you can recover the maximum effect of the agonist, but you have to give greater amounts of it. No? So you have to increase the dose of the agonist to be able to compete more for the available receptors. No? Okay, so I hope that's clear. Now, one example here is your statins. If you've heard of drugs like atorvastatin, pitavastatin, rosuvastatin, these are what we call um, HMG coenzyme A reductase inhibitors. No? These are medications that are used to uh, help lower LDL cholesterol. No? So they are said to be competitive antagonist of HMG coenzyme A for the active site of the HMG coenzyme A reductase. If you remember, HMG coenzyme A is one of the precursors of cholesterol. No? And we get HMG coenzyme A. We produce a lot of HMG coenzyme A when we eat high carb and high fat and a lot of ketogenic amino acids. No? So what we eat influence the amount of HMG coenzyme A that we produce. No? So for example, you have a patient with hyperlipidemia, mataas yung LDL cholesterol niya, no? So magbibigay ka ng statin. The statin will compete with HMG coenzyme A for the active binding site of the reductase enzyme. So by inhibiting the reductase enzyme, you cut off the conversion of HMG coenzyme A. You cut off its transformation into cholesterol down the line. But what happens if you're taking your statin, but you keep on increasing your diet, which is high in fatty acids, high in cholesterol, and high in ketogenic, proteins, no? So these sources will surmount the effect, no? Will cause a surmounting effect because when you don't modify your diet, you keep on producing now from this diet high amounts of HMG coenzyme A. So the increase in HMG coenzyme A will surmount the effect of your statin. And so your LDL cholesterol uh, does not improve. It remains elevated. No? So that is one clinical application of this dynamic concept. Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you to compute the shield equation. I'm just going to ask you to understand what it is. No? So the the shield equation is a ratio that tells you how much more agonist you need to overcome the effect of a competitive antagonist in the system. So this ratio of C prime over C prime is the agonist concentration in the presence of the competitive antagonist, and C is the agonist concentration in the absence of the antagonist. No? So you need to find out how much more agonist you need to overcome the effect of the competitive antagonist in the system. So 1 is computed as 1 plus 1 over Ki. No? So L. L is the concentration of the antagonist and Ki is the dissociation constant of the antagonists. No? So when a competitive antagonist is present, no, a higher concentration of an agonist, C prime, is needed to produce the same effect as a lower concentration without the antagonist. So for example, you have a high Ki. No? Yung competitive antagonist mo ay mataas yung uh, dissociation constant. So which means to say that if it has a high dissociation constant, then it rapidly detaches from the receptor, making it available for whatever agonist is there in the system. Therefore, in cases where you have a high Ki, then you need a smaller amount of agonist to surmount its effect. Okay, it's needed to uh, recover its effect. Okay, so the SHID equation is a ratio that tells us how much agonist is needed to overcome the effect of an antagonist. So in this equation, again, if you have a competitive antagonist that is high, meaning it rapidly dissociates from the receptor, then you need less of the agonist to surmount its effect. No? Okay. What are the clinical implications of this equation? Means that the inhibitory effect of a competitive antagonist, of course, depends on how much or what's its dose, no, or its concentration. And the effect of competitive antagonist will also depend on how much agonist is present. So, ibig sabihin, pag marami kang competitive antagonists, no, ah baka mas marami kang kailangang ibigay na agonist to surmount its effect, especially when its Ki is low, meaning it has high affinity for the receptor. And then it will also depend, no, the degree of antagonism will also depend on how much agonist is present or added into the system. So if you look at the right, this will help you understand it, no? So here, you will see that there is a persistent shift to the right, no? So for you to be able to still reach or achieve the maximum effect of the agonist, in the presence of a competitive antagonist, you might need to give higher and higher and higher doses of it, no? So here, there's a parallel shift to the right of the drug receptor curve. No? So we say that competitive antagonist binds reversibly to the same site as the agonist, increasing the concentration of the agonist overcomes or surmounts the effect of the antagonists. And therefore, there's a shift to the right of the dose response curve. What happens to the potency? The EC50 of the agonist is increased, and therefore there's a decrease in potency. No, uh, when you say increase EC50, to review, this means that you need more of the dose of the drug to be able to give you 50% of the maximum response. So if you have a higher EC50, a higher dose required for you to elicit 50% of the maximum response, it means that there's a decrease in the potency of this drug. No? The efficacy remains the same as I mentioned. So you can still achieve it, but at the expense of reduction in potency and at the expense of giving a higher dose of the agonist. Okay. So to reiterate, in competitive antagonism, the presence of the antagonist increases the concentration of the agonist needed for a given degree of response. And therefore, there's a shift to the right. No? The curve shifts to the right. So when we talk about non-competitive receptor antagonists, as I mentioned, this can bind to the same site, but this particular antagonist will form a covalent bond. So it will never dissociate from the active binding site. And therefore, this type of antagonism is considered non-competitive because uh, increasing the dose of the agonist will not overcome its effect. Okay. So you will not uh, uh, recover or achieve the maximum effect of the agonist by competing. Now, there's no competition here. If it binds to the allosteric site is also non-competitive. No? So whether the allosteric site antagonist is a reversible one or an irreversible one, then it's still non-competitive because for as long as there's um, an antagonist there in the allosteric site, then it automatically shuts down or makes unavailable the active binding site for the agonist. So even if you increase the amount of the agonist, you will not recover. You will not recover its uh, full effects, and you cannot surmount or overcome the effect of the antagonist. No? So the curve becomes like this. No? So here you have the agonist alone, and then you have an antagonist which is non-competitive. So in contrast to a competitive antagonist, you will see that the maximum effect of the agonist will not uh, will not will not be achieved in the presence of a non-competitive antagonist. So you'll see a reduction in the effect. Okay. In contrast to a competitive antagonist in which you actually recover, no? You actually can achieve the maximum effect by simply increasing the concentration of your agonist. Okay. So again, when a non-competitive antagonist binds to its receptor, increasing the concentration of the agonist will not surmount the inhibitory effect of the antagonist. So there may be formation of irreversible binding, no? Especially when you talk about non-competitive active binding site antagonists, no? Now, in the presence of spare receptors, sometimes a lower dose of your non-competitive antagonist, if you give the non-competitive antagonist at lower doses, it can leave some of the spare receptors. So you may have some vacant receptors left. And therefore, you may recover the full response of the agonist, the maximum efficacy of the agonist, but at a higher dose, at a much higher dose. No? So in exceptional cases, when there are spare receptors in the system and you give a non-competitive antagonist, sometimes, no, if the non-competitive antagonist is given at a low dose, then it might still leave some vacant spare receptors, which is available now for the agonist. So if you give the agonist this time at a higher dose, then you might uh, recover the maximum effect of the agonist. No? So uh, this is a possibility only in the presence of spare receptors, lower doses of non-competitive antagonist, and very high doses of the agonist. So this is an example of a non-competitive uh, antagonist, no? Um, Here, this is aspirin. Now, aspirin is a cardioprotectant agent. It is also an antiplatelet, no, agent. So, this is commonly used for cardiac patients as a cardioprotectant drug. Okay, it is also used, but less commonly for pain and inflammatory conditions. So, Aspirin is an example of a non-competitive antagonist, no? This is an active binding site non-competitive antagonist. It irreversibly binds and acetylates cyclooxygenase, therefore leading to inhibition of the production and synthesis of thromboxane, and this will prevent platelet aggregation. So, in layman's term, this is a blood thinner. Uh, uh, when aspirin binds to the active site in cyclooxygenase enzyme, it is irreversible because the bond uh, formed is covalent, no? And therefore, platelets are not capable of the platelet bearing the cyclooxygenase enzyme are not capable of producing no cyclooxygenase. So that process is inhibited uh, for 7 to 10 days. Okay. The 7 to 10 days is the time uh, that it takes for the bone marrow to generate new platelets. So, if the cyclooxygenase enzyme in the platelets have already been bound by aspirin, so those platelets will not recover their ability to aggregate. So it will take the bone marrow this number of days to produce new platelets, and therefore it will take this much time for platelet aggregation to set in. That's why, for example, if a patient on aspirin, you have an elderly patient who is hypertensive or has had in a history of MI and is given daily aspirin for cardioprotection as a blood thinner. If this patient is, let's say, going to have a tooth extracted or going to have minor surgery, then the physician uh, instructs him to stop the intake of aspirin at least 7 days prior to the procedure, no? Because to give time for his bone marrow to produce new platelets and therefore uh, will not have a problem of bleeding during the time of the surgery or the tooth extraction. Okay. So this time we talk about partial agonists. We have introduced to you example of full agonist in the form of isoproterenol in my example earlier, no? And as I probably mentioned earlier, a partial agonist will produce a lower response at full receptor occupancy compared to full agonists, no? So, partial agonists at beta 1 cardiac receptors will not produce the maximum response even at full receptor occupancy that is often observed with full agonists exemplified by isoproterenol, no? And it's not because of the fact that partial agonists have decreased receptor affinity. So the response is not because of, it's not an issue of receptor affinity, no? It's an issue of how they activate the receptor intrinsically, no? So partial agonists are agents that will have lower intrinsic activity or efficacy. So they are able to trigger less of a response per receptor compared to full agonists, no? So they are less efficient or efficacious in triggering cellular response. But it's not a matter of whether they bind weakly or they bind more strongly to the receptor. It's not that. It's what happens after binding. And it appears that their ability to elicit a response is less efficient compared to a full agonist. And therefore, as indicated in the diagram in the screen, you will see that a partial agonist will never give you the maximum response that is elicited when a full agonist is administered. Okay? So a partial agonist can therefore be a competitive inhibitor. Now, when it is added to the system with a full agonist or ligand there. So it is said to be a mixed antagonist, to have a mixed antagonist-agonist property, no? As the slide here indicates, no? And that is because they compete for the same binding site as the full agonists, no? So when they bind to the binding site, because they do not produce, they're incapable of producing a full response, you actually take away from the overall effect of the agonist. Now, compared to a system in which you have only the full agonist there. No? Uh, and therefore, that is the reason why they can actually uh, take away from the effect. No? So there's a decrease in the overall effect, no? Compared to when a full agonist is given alone. No? So it's indicated here, no? In the graphs before you. Okay. So again, in summary, no, this is the graph that represents an inverse agonist, the one that represents an antagonist, the one that presents a partial agonist, and this one is the graph representing a full agonist. Okay. Now, there are other antagonists in which these drugs do not at all need to interact with any receptor. No? A chemical antagonist or a chemical antagonism occurs when two substances interact directly and one drug inactivates or neutralizes the other without involving receptor binding. So an example for that is protamine and heparin. No? For example, heparin is a blood thinner, and one of the complications of too much heparin is bleeding. No? So the antidote for that is protamine. What protamine does to reduce the effect of heparin and thereby reduce uh, bleeding is to wrap around the heparin molecule, rendering it inactive. So it wraps around the heparin molecule without having to interact with any receptor. So that's what we call chemical antagonism. What about physiologic? You will observe physiologic antagonism when a drug or substance that produces an effect opposite to that of another drug by acting on different receptors or systems, not by blocking or inhibiting the same receptor. So that drug may produce the opposite effect, but by acting on another system or another receptor, but not the same receptor as the other drug. Now, for example, um, acetylcholine can cause bradycardia, no? So in order to, so it acts on acetylcholine or cholinergic receptors, no? If you want to increase or resolve the bradycardia that this agent may produce, then you can give isoproterenol. Isoproterenol will produce an opposite effect, which is tachycardia or increase in heart rate but by acting not on the cholinergic receptors, but on the beta-1 adrenergic receptors. So we call this physiologic antagonism. Okay? So I will end the first part of my lecture, and I will have a volume 2 of the recording. So part 2 of the recorded lecture has to do with signaling mechanisms and drug action. Okay, so I will upload the lecture in shorter sections. So it's easier for you to study. Okay, so I'll stop my recording and please proceed to the next volume.